do that. Yeah, so over here, you'll be clicking on new and then 2D, and then you can name it whatever you want. I have done it on my end already, so I'll just open it and I'll just be deleting all the stuff that isn't already in there. Yeah. It's everything here. Yeah, so sorry, do you have someone was saying something? Okay. Alright. In Unity, 2D is handled basically as a special case of 3D, which is a bit strange, right? You can see here that we actually have a 3D view, and 2D is just a projection of this. It's the XY plane. Right? So in this case, if I'm here and I create a cube, right? It's just going to display as an actual, right, as a square because it's top down, right? And then I go to the side, it looks like this. Yeah. So just fun facts. Right. So I've put some assets into the GDC chat. If some people came in since I last did that, so yeah. Where do you put them? Just download them and extract them first. And you want to take these two. The double size ones. And you want to drag them into your assets folder down here. So over here right now, right? If we drag these into the scene as a sprite, I mean, you see that a sprite is created. The ones with a add to at the end. Okay. Oh, sorry. Under tile sheet, the ones with the add to at the end. Okay. So I was saying, right? If you drag it into the scene, you'll see that it gets imported as one whole spreadsheet, which is probably not what you want, right? One whole sprite. So I'm going to delete the game object that we just created from that. And I'm going to click on this. And we see on the right, there are a bunch of properties. So importantly, since this is actually made out of 8 sprites and not one sprite, we have to go to sprite mode and select multiple. Then we go to the sprite editor. The button is over here on the right. It's a bit. I always forget where it is. So to cut this into 8 slices, right? There's several ways to do it. The first is you can draw your custom outlines. First is you can draw your custom outlines. right? And that makes a new slice. I'm not gonna do that. Please don't. Yeah, I'm not gonna actually do that today because uh, this thing is a lot more ordered, right? Than this spreadsheet isn't just a bunch of random things stuffed into random places. Like you see that sometimes. So you will have to slice them yourself. In this case, we can instead click slice and we can click type grid by cell count. And here we have 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have 2 rows. So we can change. If the slice is grayed out, sorry, what do you mean? Yeah, they use. So under sprite mode, you have to select multiple. Is that. Will it be grayed out if you don't? It's still grayed out. Which part is grayed out? Like the entire thing? The slice button is grayed out. Wait, okay, I have never had this issue. You can just like. Ah, you have to switch to multiple and then reopen, is it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Alright, so now if I click under this, right, you can see that it's quite nicely dissected into 8 different parts. Right? Okay, so under sprite editor, slice, and type grid by cell count. And you have 4 columns and 2 rows. Yeah, and then you click on slice and you should get it. It should be already done for you. Yeah, and then you hit apply. Okay. Yep, so now when you click on this, you should see that you have 8 different slices. Right? So we're going to do the same thing for the second tile sheet. We're not going to be using much of this today, but we'll just do it in advance. So again, let's set the sprite mode to multiple. Go to your sprite editor. Okay, yeah, and then click apply. And then we will have to slice by cell count again. And there are 7 rows. 14 columns. And we'll slice these as well. Okay, I flipped it. You're right. Okay, I think we can just click 14 and 7 and yeah, it should slice properly. And we'll click apply. And we'll ignore the fact that all of these exist for today. Yeah, so let's have all of you done that. I think this is a good point to like just wait. Or rather, if anyone hasn't, then let me know. I mean, they're separate. They're like stored with the same image, right? I think internally what the storage probably is, right? Is just that it's storing a reference to this image and it's storing like the position. Yeah, it's like kind of like that. So sometimes we have like more complicated sprite sheets, right? Let me see. I downloaded a few because I wasn't sure which one I was going to be using. Right? You'll see that it come with a lot of like different details, right, on where the sprites are. So like this has a subtexture. And there's a way to import these, but I didn't want to figure it out. Like yeah. Or I didn't want to, also like there is a way to import these, but it's actually a bit complicated. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's why. Okay. Yeah, but anyway, the idea is that you can pretend that these are individual images lah, where they are actually not. They are actually like subsections of this big image. So first we'll create our sprite for the player. So we do that just by dragging it in. And you see that a sprite gets automatically created on the left. Yeah. So over here, I'm going to go to the inspector that's on the right and rename this to player. Okay. And then for now, I'm going to create a new empty sprite, and that is going to be our platform. So create 2D objects, sprites, and then you can select square. Right, and then we'll just put a nice piece of ground here. And if you want, you can change the color of it as well. So now if you press play, you'll just see those two individual components, right? The player and the platform. And there's nothing very special about them. They're not doing anything. If you press buttons, they don't move, right? So let's call this platform while we're at it. Okay. So as for the player, I think the first thing that we will try to do is have the player affected by physics, and we will make sure that when you touch the platform, you don't fall through, right? So to have anything affected by physics in Unity, you need to give it a rigid body. So let's give it a rigid body 2D. And we can leave the settings as is. One thing we probably should make sure is that the rotation is frozen. So you check the box that says freeze rotation Z. Right. If not, like you hit the angle of you hit like the a platform at an angle, and then suddenly your character tumbles down. Right, which is not really what you want to happen in a platformer. Okay, and now if you press play here, your character should fall, but should fall through the platform, which is expected behavior.
Sorry, but instead of the character falling, right, it's my platform that falls.
Oh, okay. So do you have the character selected on your
I think you
on the left
added
side?
it. I
Yeah,
think you
I think you
added
added
rigid body to
the
the
platform. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry, my bad. I see.
No, it's fine. Like when you're getting used to Unity, it's like sometimes can have all these complicated things, right?
Is there any way to remove a component?
Yeah. So I think you can select it and like no, you can't. Three dots remove component. Three dots on the top right of the component. You can also disable the component by clicking on the button on the top left.
Right clicking also works.
Yeah, right clicking also works. Okay. So once you've gotten the rigid body in, we also need to make sure this guy collides with the ground. Right? Okay, so the way we're going to do that is by giving both of these colliders. So we're going to give this a box collider 2D. Yeah, so this box collider, we realize, right, when you select it in your scene window, you should see that like the collider is mapping the exact rectangle of the sprite. This is usually not what we want to have happen.
You
So,
see it.
are you in the scene window? Oh, you select the player, right? And you
Okay.
see this green, there's a bit of a green outline. It's a bit, maybe a bit hard to see, but like if you deselect the box collider, the outline is gray, right? And if you select box collider, the outline's green, right? Like this.
I don't see a difference.
You don't?
Never mind.
Are you selecting the... Oh, does it have to do with whether box collider is expanded or not? It looks like it.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna hide everything else while we're at it. So now we click edit collider, right? And that lets us edit where the bounds of our collider are. Right, so for now we'll just draw a box around our player and the ground, like that. And I'm like just gonna make it smaller on the bottom as well, because when I tried this just now, it was like it's just awkwardly floating on the ground a bit. Okay, so now you see when you select it, the collider is now the smaller bounding box. Oh, by the way, whenever you make any changes like this, right, always make sure your game is not playing. Because if your game is playing, what happens is that any changes you make here, right, are only specific to when you run the game. So when you stop playing the game, it will actually get reverted back to the original settings. So if I play the game here, right, and I select something, and I press stop, you see that this thing is unchecked. So yeah, if you're wondering like why your things aren't changing, that might be a thing that's causing it. Yeah. Okay, so we're also gonna give a box collider to the platform, a box collider 2D. In this case, the bounding box should be exactly what we want, so we'll leave it at that. By default, these things should collide. Right? To get that, it falls. And can I drag it up? Yeah, if I drag it up, it will still fall. Okay, so that's our basic setup for a platformer, right? The next thing we need to do is to get this guy to move. I think I'll also stop for a bit and like just check if everyone's yeah, everyone's following.
How do you move the character when you're in play mode?
Okay, so yeah, when you press play, it goes to the game mode in Unity, right?
Yeah.
So you can actually select the tab back for scene, right? And you can actually go between the scene and the game. And in fact, you can go between the scene and the game when you're not playing, right? Just to check where things are. Some people like to set the windows up like this so that they can see both at once. I'm okay with like just setting it up like two over here.
Thanks.
Yeah, so next we are going to get the player to walk. And to get the player to walk, we're going to have to write some code. So add component, and here I will just type in player movement. And it will suggest that I create a new script. So script name may only consist of a to z09 underscore. So I think, yeah, delete the space there, I guess. Right, so create that, and I don't know if you have to double click this to get your editor to open. But if it doesn't open, then double click this in your assets, right? It should be auto created in your assets. So to control the player movement, the way to do it, right, is since we've enabled a rigid body on our player. Rigid body actually contains a bunch of features for editing it in terms of velocity, in terms of like angular velocity, in terms of those things mostly. So we will need a reference to this rigid body component, right? So here, I will say private rigid body 2D, and we can call it rigid body 2D. Or just rigid body, like, and it's.
So, but how do you move from Unity to VS Code?
How do I move from Unity to VS Code? When you double click this, it should open VS Code, right? If you have that installed.
Also need to set the preference.
Oh yeah. Yeah, last week I had this problem. So once my thing loads again, I will show you like the thing you might have to do. So under file, I think it's under build. No, it's not under build settings. It's under project settings.
Preference.
Oh, it's under preferences. Yeah, edit preferences. Yeah. Is it edit preferences?
Edit preferences.
Yeah, edit preferences. Unity has too many settings menus. And like, okay.
Yeah.
Under external tools, external script editor, and just make that VS Code. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway? So we defined a private field, rigid body 2D. So what private means is that you can only access this thing from inside of this class. So no other behavior can see what this is. Right, and the other thing we're going to set is we're going to have a parameter for the movement speed. So in this case, let's say public float move speed. Semicolon. Okay. So this code will need some way to know what's the rigid body on this game object, right? The player movement will have to know about what this rigid body is. So when we start the game, right, we will have to get a reference to this rigid body, right? So I'll say rigid body at the start. Rigid body equals get component. Rigid body 2D. Okay. Give me a minute. I need to close my Telegram before like hear all the notification sounds in the recording. Yeah. Okay, and just so that we don't run into issues, let's also give this a default value. Let's say that this equals 5. as a float. So you can just write 5f. Okay, so movement is fairly simple, right? We need to get our left right keys, and we need to multiply it by this move speed, and then we need to add it to the rigid body speed. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm going to get this rigid body's velocity, right? So that's vector 2. It's a 2-element vector velocity is equal to rigid body dot velocity. And we'll need to get the input, right? Like whether you're pressing left and right. So Unity actually has two systems for this. It has an old system which I'm going to be using, and it has a newer system which a bit more troublesome to explain. So yeah. So we go to project settings under edit. If you see under input manager, you'll see that it defines input as a bunch of axes. Right? In fact, you see a ridiculous number of them.
Hi, sorry, can we go back to the code again,
Okay.
just for a short while?
Yeah, it's not very complete lah. So do you still need this to be on screen?
I took a photo already, thanks.
All right. Okay. Yeah, so you see that when you click any of these things, I mean, I'm going to be going back to it like very shortly. So when you click any of these things, you see that we have this axis which is called horizontal, right? And so you see that you have two kinds of buttons defined for horizontal, right? You have left and you have right. So most input under the input manager system, right, involves the idea of axis. So sometimes you have some axes that only have one direction, right? This one has only a positive button. It's left control. You have jump, right, which is bound to space.
If my input for the horizontal doesn't show left or right, do I just add it in?
There are two of them, I think. So like if you see the bottom one doesn't have a left or right. So by right it should be there by default.
I see.
Yeah. So if you scroll down you see another horizontal. That one doesn't have anything bound.
That's so confusing.
Yeah, it's confusing, but it's also the canonical way to say that let's say if I want to define three buttons that mean left, right? This one only gives me two. Right, it gives me left and A. then if I want to add another one, then I might have to do it over here, right? I might have to say that, let's say I want to have HJKL controls, right? Then, yeah, I have to put it here to create a new element in this list. So this also has a nice binding for joysticks and stuff. There's support for controller, but I've like never really tried it. Don't have a controller with me. Yeah, so to get the input, right, there are two ways to get input, right? And here we'll be using, so let's get this and let's store it as a variable. So it will be a float. Float input, right? X is equal to input dot get axis raw horizontal. So there are also two functions here. There's get axis and get axis raw. When you get axis, there is some smoothing applied. So instead of going from 0 to 1, it will like go up slowly and it will also go down slowly. So kind of depends what you want. Here, like there's no reason that I use this over get axis other than like I prefer that movement. So this gives you a number between -1 and 1. Right? So what we will need to do is we say velocity, let me spell velocity correctly, dot x is equal to move speed multiplied by this number, input x. Oops, accidentally took a screenshot. And we will need to save this back into the rigid body. Right, so rigid body dot velocity is equal to velocity. So velocity here refers to the velocity that we define, right? If you've had any experience programming, right, you might be asking like, why don't we just set this directly? Like, this might be a bit like in depth if it's your first time encountering this, right? But your question might be like, why don't we just do something like this, right? And the reason is that in C#, like the syntax is very much like we are accessing a property called velocity, right? But it's actually secretly like calling a getSet function. Yeah. If that doesn't make sense to you, then yeah, it's alright. But basically, because of this, we cannot modify this straight, right? So we need to get it first, and we need to modify it, and we need to save it back. Yeah. So I'll leave this here for a bit. But actually, I'll show you what it does first, and then I'll go back to that. So now when you press left and right, your character goes left and right. Yeah. Now I will go back to the script and. If anyone has any issues, like please raise them.
My arrow keys don't work.
Your arrow keys don't work.
Yeah, it doesn't move like that.
Okay, so do you see anything on the bottom bar here?
No.
For me, I see the reference script unknown on this behavior is missing.
The reference script unknown on this behavior is missing. I don't. Oh. Okay, so on the player, right? You have a rigid body and you have this script, right? This player movement script. Okay, one thing that might be causing it to not work is that last week we had someone who like just had this box unchecked. So those are just very easy things to check, like if they're done or not. You have this on the same component as on the same game object as the player, right? The one with the rigid body 2D. They're both on the player, right?
Yeah, correct. And they're both checked as well.
They're both checked as well. Okay. So why is it giving me issues? Okay. Over here you did a get component, right? I think we can close this right bar. Like, actually nothing that I need to see in this right bar. Here you did a get component, right?
Yes, I did.
Rigid body 2D.
Yeah.
And it says that the reference script is not.
It's missing.
Okay, can you go to your console and so under here, like there's a tab for project, there should also be a tab for console.
Yeah.
Does it give you any more information, like line
No,
numbers?
Nothing, just that, that's all.
I mean, at this point, like I'm going to go through like the stereotypical debugging workflow and like Google it. Does it give a game object player, is it?
No, nothing of that sort.
Hmm.
Actually, never mind. You just help the guy
Yeah.
who
Okay, sorry.
couldn't do it.
Sorry, I think it was L who was having the issue, right? The other issue.
And the arrow keys
Your arrow keys.
not working.
Okay, firstly, did you save your player movement?
Yeah.
You save your player movement? Box is checked here, right? The box
Yeah,
here is
but
checked.
I guess this time I didn't see any like loading going.
You press play, your guy falls, but there is no.
Yeah, I pressed the arrow keys and it don't move.
Okay, AD also doesn't work.
No. I remember it's like after you save your script, it's supposed to have some loading time,
Yeah.
right? I didn't see that.
Okay, no, I don't think that's like if it loaded the first time, then you probably shouldn't have issues regarding that. But I mean, if you're worried about that, like there's a way to do it, right? Like just kind of add a space and save it. Okay, so under your player, right?
Yeah.
Look at the move speed here. Is it 0?
Oh yes.
Okay, yeah, that explains it. Yeah, that's why I set it to 5 here, because like when I was doing like my dry run, I didn't set it to 5. And then like quite a few times I was like, wait, why is this guy not moving? It must be
Wait,
0.
so it's like you must change it in the Unity platform.
Yeah, so whenever you expose a thing as public, right? It is exposed as a field in the editor. right? So here you can actually edit the move speed.
Oh, so it's like even if you put 5 in the script, it doesn't change it automatically to 5.
It might not, but what this means is that like if I drag it to a new script, right? If I drag it to the platform for whatever reason, then it will be auto set to 5 lah. Like I think like there's something weird that if you changed it before, it might not it will not auto update and stuff like that. So maybe that's what could have happened.
Works now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Let's save our scene while we're at it. Yeah. So there's something that's kind of weird about our sprite, right? The sprite is like just facing one way. It's also not like animated, but we'll get to that when we get to it. It's facing one way right now. So to fix that, note that under our sprite renderer, right, component, there is this thing called flip, right? And it has two checkboxes for X and Y, right? So yeah. So the idea is that if we are moving right, we want to be in this state, and if we are moving left, we want to be in this state. Actually, come to think of it, like we can actually do this in the animation, I think. So let's go into the animations. Let's make it look a bit less dry when it's walking. Actually, let's not go into the animations yet. I think like maybe that's subject for another week, because like I've already introduced like quite a few things this lesson. Okay. So yeah, now we also maybe want to implement jumping, right? So unlike the horizontal movement, right, jumping should be when you press the space key, right? Not when you, like, it doesn't matter if you're holding down the space key, right? It just triggers when you press the space key. So like let's also define a parameter before we do anything. Let's call it jump speed. And let's set it to, I actually don't know like what number is reasonable here. Let's also set it to 5, I guess. 5 is probably too short. Let's set it to like 10. And if you're jumping too high, let's like figure that out. Okay. So over here, I'm going to insert some blank space for us to talk about our y velocity. So if, and we need to get whether the button was pressed, right? So input dot get button. Get button down. Yeah. So this button is called jump, right? As we saw just now, there was a jump axis. And for now, we'll just say that velocity dot y is equal to our jump speed. So again, there are two ways that we have accessed the input. One is via the axis, right, which gives us a number between -1 and 1. And get button down, which gives us a true-false value, a boolean, right? So whether the button was just pressed. And there's also get button and there's get button up, right? So get button returns true as long as it's pressed, and get button up returns true on the frame after you release the key. Yeah, so let's save this. And let's go back to Unity. Right. And okay, space to jump. Okay, the jumping is like way too loose. But I mean, your character jumps at least. Does that?
So the rigid body component like controls all the gravity and everything, is it?
Yeah, it's basically a physics component. The rigid body and the colliders.
You can jump while you're in the air.
Yeah, you can jump while you're in the air. I was gonna get to that. But that's a good observation. Yeah, is everyone... Is anyone behind? Okay, I will assume if no one's like saying anything, then yeah. So as can't remember who has like kindly noted, you can currently jump all in the air, right? That's not really what you want for a platformer. And secondly, the other thing that we want to fix, that we wanted to fix, is that the gravity is currently too low, right? It's like your character is like not really, it's like kind of floating, feels very floaty. Generally not what you want for a platformer. So we can set our gravity scale to like 2 first, and let's see if that feels better. There's a better way to do this, by the way. Like you can actually whack your kinematics equations on your jump velocity and your movement, and now the jump is a bit short, so I'll change the jump speed to 15. Yeah. Really advise like you do the math. There's a very nice presentation. I wonder if I have it open on doing the math for platformers. Yeah, this here. Like didn't want to make this into like math cohort 3. Okay. So again, since we were doing this while it was playing, we have to set it when we have to set it again, right? When we are out of there. Yeah. So just make sure you do that. So now we gotta solve the problem that this character can jump all in the air. So we want to have some sort of way to tell, like, if is the character grounded or not, right? So over here, below here, I am going to create a new function in Unity to tell us if the player is grounded or not, right? So to create a new function, we have to say the return type of the function, which is a bool, true false value, and is grounded. Okay, yeah, and it's complaining that not all code paths return value. So I'm gonna just like make it return true for now, so that my compiler doesn't, so that the editor doesn't complain. And we're going to add the additional clause here, right? So if the jump button is pressed and is grounded, right? Per best practices, we should probably also specify that this is private. But it's going to work all the same if you don't. So one of the ways, there are actually quite a few ways to check if a thing is grounded, right? We could, for instance, we could have a separate collider that we use to just check if something is grounded, right? So we just draw like some rectangle around here, and we say that if this rectangle is touching the ground, then it is on the ground, right? Because we don't want to just have it be like, are you touching a wall, right? If not, that lets people wall jump very easily. So you want to check right below your feet. So this collision is handled by physics 2D. Physics 2D dot let's figure this. Yeah, so there are quite a few ways you can do this. We can overlap a circle under you, or we can draw a line, right? We can draw a line downwards using raycast. So if you ever do like 3D, raycast can be very useful to figure out, for instance, where your mouse is pointing, right? In 3D. In 2D, we raycast to just like see what's below you, I guess. So actually, for the raycast, right, instead of using the player's position, right, we should consider where the bounding box is. So we also need to keep a reference to the bounding box. So private box collider 2D box collider. And over here, we'll do our get component again in start. Collider is get component box collider 2D. Okay, yeah, and so let's scroll down here and let's go back and let's say return raycast.box collider dot there's the bounding box, right? Bounds dot center it expects there are quite a few forms that raycast expects. So it expects a direction and a distance. That's one of the forms, right? You have more than that actually. Right? So the direction should be downwards. So you can just say vector2 dot down. Right? And the distance is half the height of the box collider. So box collider dot bounce dot height divided by 2, right? But I don't know if you can read this at this size. It says this is the total size of the box. This is always twice as large as the extents. So the extents is like how much does it stretch from the center. So in this case, that's very convenient. So let's just use extents and we'll get the y from there. Yeah, so that's a very long line. So I'm just gonna, for the sake of like keeping it on one screen, because my font size is like really huge, I'm gonna space it out like this. You don't have to. And this gives us a raycast hit 2D object. So let's assign it to a variable. So and just call it hit. Is everyone following? I think this was a bit. Okay, so we'll need to check if this raycast to the object actually hit anything. So just check the collider, right? And if it's not null, then it would have hit. Okay. In this case, we actually want to give it some sort of leeway, right? So instead of saying just half the height, I'm just going to add a small amount to it. Just for leeway purposes. Okay, and it still jumps. So we gotta figure out what's going on. I think I know what's going on. But yeah, so if it still jumps in the air, like you know what's happening. I should put it on the code screen while I pause. But they all have this? I think there is see what the other signatures are just to make sure that. Yeah, okay.
What's going on?
I know exactly what we have to do, but for now just get this in first, I guess. It should still you should still get that your player jumps in the air. The reason this is happening is because the player is detecting itself and it's saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm still I'm below myself, so I can jump, right?" That's what's happening. Okay. So to do this, we need to specify what kind of things can this connect with, right? So in this case, this is expressed via layers. So in Unity, everything is on a different layer, right? And everything can be given some tags. So let's create some new layers. So you go to layer, and I think under edit, add layer. Oh, I've added two layers. One is called player and one is called ground. But you shouldn't have these already defined. So for your player, make it at the player layer, and for the platform, make it at the ground layer. And in this case, I'll also check something because I don't remember what the defaults are. So check physics 2D. The player should interact, and this is, you see that this is like a collision matrix, right? So like which layers collide with which layers. In this case, the player collides with the ground, and the ground collides with the player, which as a player collides with the ground collides with other ground, which we might not want. So I'm gonna uncheck that, but it shouldn't affect anything because our grounds shouldn't have Actually, I'll select ground. Yeah, let's select ground. Leave everything as default. Okay. So now over here, we will need to get the layer mask of the ground. So layer mask dot get mask ground. I defined it with a capital G, so I have to write capital G here. So yeah, do note that it's probably case sensitive. So now with any luck, hopefully jump doesn't work at all now. Platform, is it bound to ground? It is. Let's give it some more leeway then. Yeah, okay, that worked. So instead of 0.01, give it something higher, I guess. Okay, is this working for everyone? I mean, at this point we can have a short break, and by at this point that we can have a short break, I mean I need to use the toilet. So give me about 5 minutes. If you have questions, you can leave them in chat, I guess. Okay, so is anyone having issues with this part? I'll assume not at this point. Hmm. Okay, now is a good time to talk about animations. So, if you've noticed, right, the player is always facing right, and it's kind of static, right? In a real game, you'll have animations for this player. So here's where we will use Unity's animation system. Okay, so let's compress all of these as well. So here I'm going to add component animator with an OR, not animation. I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to select create animator controller, and we'll call this player anim, I guess. It's just a name. So if I double click this, I see this this screen, this animator screen. And currently we have no animations defined, so let's get to it then. So let's create an animation. So right click, create animator controller, right click, create animation. right? And let's rename it to player. Let's create the idle animation first, right? So this animation will be specifically for this player. Right? Can I? Okay. So let's create a state from select. Yeah, so I have this selected in my assets, create a state from selected clip. Right, player idle. So now if I open player idle, will it let me, if I click on player, will it let me configure player idle? Still won't. This thing's a bit finicky. Okay, so instead of doing it like this, I'm going to delete this first. I'm going to go to player anim. I'm going to open the animation window. Right, so if you haven't done that yet, you can go to window, animation. So I'm going to click on player and I'm going to create an animation clip. And here I'm going to call it player idle, right? .anim. So it's quite nice. It's quite a nice interface for creating animations. Right. In this case, I'm going to add a property, right? And it is going to be the sprite renderers is going to be the sprite of the sprite renderer. And I don't think this this sprite actually comes with like any sort of animation. So you're just gonna see that it has two events. The first event has this idle animation, and the second event is still at this idle sprite. In fact, what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna delete the second event so that it's just constantly over here, and it's only 1 frame long.
How do you get it?
How do
into
I?
the How do you get that sprite inside?
Okay, so on the left of player sprite, right? Do you have a player sprite listed under your animation pane? On the left of
Yeah.
it, there's a triangle.
Oh yeah, and then
Yeah, you see now you see this small icon, right?
yeah.
Okay. So now I will come back to our animator, and yeah, the motion should be back to player idle. Speed doesn't really matter. Yeah, okay. So now we need to create a new animation. Right? Oh, this player has an animator controller and this. Okay. I'm gonna delete this old one we made then. Yeah. The way it ties it saves animations like this, but also ties them to a sprite. It's a bit strange. I'm just like I know roughly how it works, but not enough to not screw up, basically. So if we click on player idle and we click on player to the left, yeah, now we should see that you have an option to create a new clip. Right? And we're going to call it player walk.
But where is the create new clip?
Okay, so under animation, right? So you double click on player idle, right? Then you select player on the left. Then you should see that this stops being gray. The interface is a bit arcane, like, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So now you can add a property and it will be the sprite again for now. Okay, and click the plus to add it. I will So in this case, right, we no longer want it to be just these movements, right? So instead, what we can have is we have the walking should be alternating between these two sprites, 3 and 4. So I'm going to drag 3 into the first one, and I'm going to drag 4 into the second one, and I'm also going to create another event with 4 at time 19, just so that this clip is 20 frames long. So now can I play the animation clip? Yeah. So now you see that it's walking, right? In the game screen. So now you see that we have two sort of transitions, right? We have two things that could we have two so we have two states, right? One is the player is idling, and the other is the player is walking. So what you're going to want to do is we're going to define some transitions between these two animation states. So to do that, you right click, make transition, and you drag to player walk. And I'm going to do the same in reverse. And you should see that there's an arrow from idle to walk, and there's an arrow from walk to idle.
How do you view your animation again?
It should be a new tab under like in your game window, like scene game animator, if you've opened it. If not, you can go to window, animation, and animator, and you should see that. Okay, and now we have to define when we are going to transition from idle to walking, right? Or when we are going to transition from walking to idle. So let's say that you are idle. So let's click on this transition, and it has conditions, right? And we can add some conditions to say that if the player satisfies these conditions, it goes from idle to walking. But first, before we add these conditions, we have to add a parameter. So under animator, right? So you see over here on the top left, there is a tab for layers and there is a tab for parameters. So let's add a new parameter. Let's call it Vx. Let's just call it Vx and Vy. Right. Did I add a float parameter? Yeah, float. And make sure to add a float parameter. Add a float parameter called Vy. We are not going to use Vy for the idle to walking transition, but it's useful, right?
How do you see the parameter?
So animator, top left, you have two tabs. One is called layers, one is called parameters. Right. So you should be able.
What I think mine like disappeared some.
Your animator disappeared?
No, the layers in parameter.
You have these things in your site, right? Tell me it's not a version thing. You don't have layers and parameters here. So is it that you
No.
only see this screen? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The I thing.
Yeah. That's where it is. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. You show and hide this thing. Okay.
So you created is that what is that? VX.
Vx and Vy lah. Okay. So now, right? Let's talk about the walking to idle transition first. Right? So if you're already walking, we want to make you stop walking, provided that your speed, your absolute speed, right, is let's say less than half, right? Your Vx is less than half. Currently, our Vx is either 5 or minus 5. But in case we have any fractional movement, that might be nice to have. Right? So I will go to my conditions on the right. I will click on the transition, right, from walk to idle. I will go to the conditions here. And I will say Vx is less than 0.5, right? 0.5. And I will also say that Vx should be greater than negative 0.5. Okay? So if I have more than one condition, it will only apply when both of these conditions are fulfilled. Also, one thing I will do is I will uncheck this box on top that says has exit time. This is like mostly for if you want to make the transition between animations, right? If you want to do something with it, like you want to smooth it out. There are ways to handle that, but in this case, for the sake of our platform, we can just cut straight to the idle animation, right? Doesn't really matter. Okay, so for idle to walking, we actually have two cases in which you could start walking from an idle position, right? You could have you are starting to move to the right, 0.5, Vx greater than 0.5, in which you start walking. So again, set that as your condition and make sure has exit time is disabled. Or your Vx is less than negative 0.5. So I'm going to make another transition to do this. Why there like okay. Oh yeah, we can see that these two transitions are on the list. So Vx, this was greater than 0.5 and less than negative 0.5. Again, turn has exit time off. So now we see that. Oh yeah, we don't see that. Okay, whoops, forgot. We have to do some coding stuff first before we see that, right? Because these are just parameters. These are like I named them Vx and Vy. It doesn't actually matter what we call them, right? They're just names. So the rest of your code has to go and tell this animator, this is my speed right now. And then your animator will see that and it will decide it will decide how to transition. Right, so let's go back to our Visual Studio, which I seem to have closed. So here, we need to get a reference to our animator as well. Private animator. And as usual, in start, we will do a get component. Okay. So over here, I will just say that let's tell the animator what our speeds are. So set float animator.set float. It takes a string vx animator. Sorry, not animator. Velocity.x, right? So animator.set float vy velocity.y. So now hopefully it works. Save the code and hopefully we'll see that, yeah, when you're walking right, it's moving to the right. When you're walking left, it's at least playing the walking animation.
Oh, we haven't done anything with the Y yet.
Sorry? Yeah, we haven't done anything with
anything with the Y.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. That will be when we do some jumping, right? So I'm just defining it first, so we don't have to come back to it. So yeah, ignoring the flipping of position, we can also start defining the jumping, right, animations. So to do that,
For some reason my animation's not playing.
your animations are not playing. Okay, so you do a set float. Is there a good way to see this? If I put the window to the animation, I can see I can have the parameter windows here, right? And then I can see oh, they're not changing when I move. That's funny. Okay, so this doesn't help us. Okay, so the thing I might check, right, is your player walk. Your player walk is showing two different sprites, right? Those are like, small things I might check.
Um, two different, yeah.
Yeah, they're two different sprites. This means that maybe the transition is not happening. Right? So your two transition conditions, right? It should be going to walking if it's less than 0.5, less than minus 0.5 or more than 0.5. So this is a or, so we have two separate transitions. If it's on the same transition, it won't work because that's an and. Right? It will
Oh, then how
only
do you create a new one?
So right click on player idle, make transition, and then drag over. Again. So like let me just kind of show it for here, right? Right click, make transition, drag it over. Yeah, I'm gonna delete this transition. Because if you have one transition, right, it's gonna it's gonna ask, is Vx less than minus 0.5 and greater than 0.5? And like, of course that can't be true, but computer is dumb, it doesn't know that.
Oh,
Yeah.
let me test.
Rest of you are okay? You're not saying anything.
Or
Like,
when I walk right, it works. Or when I walk left.
when you walk left, it doesn't. Okay, so yeah, you need one for less than minus 0.5 and you need one for greater than 0.5. We haven't done the logic for flipping the player when you're walking left yet. So
Very weird. I must walk a certain distance before it starts.
okay, so do you have did you set your has exit time?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it should be false. Because again, this is for like situations where you want your animations to flow a bit more smoothly. Right. Often sometimes you have like a 3D model, right? That's also animated via this interface. If you notice, like there's a lot that we can control. There's actually a lot that we can control in an animation, right? In this, we are only controlling the sprite, but excuse me. You can also control like the collider shape, even uh, can control the gravity, which is pretty crazy, right? Can control the jump speed, the move speed. Yeah.
How is your player idle bar spasming like that?
What?
The player idle bar spasming.
Oh, yeah, I think it's because it's trying to show the progress of player idle. But player idle is a one frame animation. So it's like
You made it.
yeah, so it's just like yeah, I made it one frame animation. So that's why it's spasming like that. Because it's like just completing its process or progress, I guess. Yeah, the other options here, like you can see the speed, you can control the speed, you can control a bunch of other parameters. All these options you're not using. Okay. Next we might want to handle the jump, right, as we were saying. And there are two sprites for jumping, right? One is kind of a jump and one is kind of a fall. So let's double click on any one of our animations and click on the player, right? And now you should see that you can create a new clip for this player. So let's create a new clip. Let's call it player jump. And this can also be a one frame animation. So that's frame 2. Yeah. Add a last one. Create a new clip. We call it player fall. And let's drag the... Oh, you don't have to select add property. Okay, looks like it. I was having some issue with this when I was doing my dry run, so that's why like kind of doing things in weird ways. Yeah, you can just drag the sprite into the animation window. So come to think of it, we might want some like complicated behavior based on like whether you're grounded but you're in the air, or I don't think that matters actually, come to think of it. Like if you're grounded, I think like we can just assume that if your speed is more than 0, you're jumping. If your speed is less than 0, you're falling. And then if it's exactly 0, you're either idling or you're walking. Right? So you can start jumping from any state. You can also start falling from any state. Right? Doesn't matter if you are not moving, right? Maybe the platform disappears below you. So let's make a transition from any state to player jump, and let's make a transition from any state to player fall. So this should be, jump should just be Vy greater than 0. Fall should just be Vy less than 0. And if we need to set some thresholds on this, we will figure that out. Once you land, I think you can go straight to idle. Right? So in this case, our condition will be from jumping to idle. You'll go from jumping to idle when Vy is... Okay, we have to set a threshold. It's only greater than or less, so we do have to set a threshold. And I'm just gonna set the thresholds as 0.1 for now. Right? And you go back to idle when you are between those two. So less than 0.1. So fall when you go to fall when you're less than minus 0.1. So from jump, you go to idle if your Vy is less than 0.1. And from fall, you go to idle if your Vy is greater than 0.1, minus 0.1. Okay, yeah. Make sure has exit time is unchecked on all of those four.
Could I see the VS Code again?
Okay. So the entire code that makes this work is that we just update our velocity to the animator. Do you need me to stay here longer or?
Give me a moment, I'll put the
Mm.
screenshot.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah, so now you see when you're jumping, right, you switch to the jumping animation state, and when you're falling, you switch to a falling animation state. And this feels very unresponsive, and I don't know why. Like, I'm gonna try to shift these a bit smaller. And see if it feels like tighter. Yeah, for some reason it's only going to like your jump. Like midway through the jump, which is very, very strange. Okay. Okay. When you fall off, it also changes. Yeah. Okay, it's about 10, so that should be about the end of the session. So like I would have gotten this to flip, but probably continue on that next session. I don't think yeah, wanna end on time. So yeah, I will save this and I will just I'll just upload the zip to a Google Drive folder, and I will upload this recording as in addition to last week's, which was just a simple intro, to and send the link as well. I'll try to do it by tonight. Yeah. So thanks for coming. And